Poems to a Listener, readings and conversation with contemporary poets.
Free falling, free floating, each nameless day comes down upon its crumpled canopy of cloud. The long strings of the sun pull from the sky dray horse and chariot. The iron wheels spin behind the leather tugs and jeweled bridle. Then we in our flowing robes come drifting downward. Down we come in all our houses. Doors open, we walk among our homes.
Welcome to Poems to a Listener. I'm Henry Lyman, and in this half-hour program, we'll be visiting poet Joseph Langland and listening to poems from The Wheel of Summer, The Green Town, and From Anybody's Song, published by Doubleday in 1980. In the poem we just heard, entitled Dailiness, somebody, two people perhaps, waken in the morning and become in a way anybody or everybody, all of us waking together into the sunlight.
There's something about feeling engaged with the nature of day and light. You want to do something, you pull the curtains open, you peer out, you sort of feel as though you wrap yourself in some other external element and begin to sort of wake up and live. If I feel too drowsy and sleepy in the morning, I might put on some music and just start dancing in the living room.
There's a lot of music in the poem, too.
I mean to have it there, of course.
It seems to come into us, the music of a poem. It comes into the very body, doesn't it?
Well, it's meant to do so, I think. I always wanted to write a poem, in which I would just sort of take the entire bodily apparatus as a kind of musical instrument. In the shell of the ear. Your warm skin is an old road under my hands, as mine and yours. If I have wandered deep in the cave of your ear, then hear me out in my watery songs while your fronds of hair wave like lilies over the traveled sea. Though body aches, body is lovely still, music of muscle and timpani of bone, reeds and the gut-strung frets of mind. Wound to a pulse of bellows, the blood follows the blue arterioles into the veins of earth. If the heart, that live volcano, troubles the lost and soft subcontinents for love, let it burst at last if it must. Somewhere an old horn blows, forever new, by a dark cave filled with numinous passages that feed at last upon this ancient sea. The blood rises, it floods the body's shore, and congeals to grains of salt on a bed of sand, asleep in the ear of Circe, like a shell.
The music of this poem, it seems to me, has something to do with the familiarity of two people who've been together a long time.
I dedicated the poem to my wife Judith. She's a painter and been very much involved in the sensual aspects of color and shape and form. And so it seemed appropriate that I would write a poem that attempted to be sensuously involved with all these aspects.
Your bodies are seen as music.
We want to feel that, and in poetry we always want that anyway. Rocky Spring Creek. Water and music murmur out of ground, mumbling their vague and incoherent songs, while slumberous bubbles splatter to the sun. Here where I belly down upon the bank, sliding toward grace across sun-burning grass, I slip my fingers slyly in the dark, chilled water reeds to wander in their roots. Mutely protesting, supple bodies bend, inviting muscled arms to twist in slow delight against that sinuous whispering, while still the body, hot within the sun, slides slowly, slipping down, enfolded then in clinging arms of spring-washed watercress. They sleep in water who are drowned in love. They sleep in water who are drowned in love.
Your boyhood?
Yes. I try to imagine myself as a kind of teenager.
As a lover of the water, as a lover of the world, physically a lover, becoming, in a way, the stream itself?
Yes, that's what I wanted. It's funny because it's true. In one sense, you can feel there's no separation whatsoever. And other times, and for other people, sometimes there's total alienation in the same place.
But the poem gets across that gap, right?
Well, it's meant to. I might have written another poem at the same time, looking back to the same period, which would represent that kind of alienation of self and body from place. Sacrifice of a Hill of Ants. We gathered the winter wood in the middle of fall, working with brush fires going, meant for scraps, from trimming the trees of spindly twigs and bark fallen in chips of timber from the axe. This kept us tidy, and it kept us warm, and though it wasted upward in a flash of crackling blaze too sudden for much good, at least we knew it would. That acrid smoke, mischievous in the wind, drove us off from a tree we had felled, and I, idling around with sparks, spied an ant-hill and red ants scurrying upwind from the fire. I teased a little flame upon a stick, then bore it flickering forward like a smile and stuck it in the middle of their run for a little harmless fun. Snatching our spade, I thrust it at the top of that small hill and cast it to one side. There an amazing city in all its crowd of rapid instincts, wrinkled in ruts of time, ran far beyond my innocence. Those dots danced to the sparkling missiles in their eyes, so I submarined another underground to watch them run around. The way they seized their wealth and hauled it off, a frenzy of intention, I could tell they knew where they were going, sure of forms. Those bright, corrupted arteries were shed as if deliberate speed could save them all. How could they know what I was up to next, arriving with a pitchfork filled with fire upon their town entire? In all their miniature wisdom suddenly trapped, they ran off crazily for their cellar homes, under such sunlight that their heads went mad and twisted all the wits their world had known. They buckled in bloom, rolled in a dead flash, while odors from their parching bodies rose, nut-brown, below the cataclysmic pyres of the afternoon's desires. Then the wind shifted, so back we went to work. Our young arms flailed upon October's ease toward oven breads and kitchen chairs all rocked back from the roaring stove on a winter's eve. Chatting casually, snug in a chilly world, we worked the pivot of fire, while a smoky dream rose from the miniature hill where 1,000 heads sang in their crackling beds.
The anthill itself becomes a burning city.
Oh, yes, it is the city.
All the fire imagery.
Oh, yes, all of the fire imagery, the smoky dream, the cataclysmic pyres, the odors from the parching bodies, and even when I'm referring to things like our young arms flailed upon October's ease toward oven breads and kitchen chairs all rocked back from the roaring stove on a winter's eve, I'm just want way in the distance some kind of resonance of the ovens and stoves of the Holocaust.
With its fire.
Yes. See, I was in World War II. I was in the army for 4 years, 2 years in Europe. And actually on VE Day in Europe, part of my duties on that day was to go out to Buchenwald to help minister to the survivors who were still there.
So you were there?
Yes, I know how that is. Buchenwald, near Weimar. Through barbed wire enclosures, their bodies bloodless under metallic thorns like an unauthorized crucifixion, the animal faces of handsome Europe steered and grinned and begged and leered. They had piled some bodies up, naked to God like cordwood for a fire. If eyes and faces turned, or jaws hung out among the shriveled limbs, they sang, thank God, no hymns. Pallid with black dishonor, nailed to the numerals of striped uniforms, stripped of their native hair, they snared me with their unashamed display and mocked at my dismay. A rapid, frantic babbling I took for a Slavic tongue, a complete stranger. But a wrinkled skeleton wavered up the wire and whispered in English, his mind is sick. In anguish, the proud white brow of man, where the eye nobly shines, had crashed down. It grovelled on the ground, more than Greece falling, more than Rome raised in its charred home. The low grey barrack stood, dumb, in a chain line in the torn-up land. The bleak doggy eyes rolled to and fro, compounded with despair, blind to the exit there. I could not touch them, I could not ask forgiveness, not even comfort them. I came from another land, and stood at the deathbed of my own father again, in that vast, mad graveyard of falling men.
You were there?
Always. The first thing I met when I came was a funeral procession, actually. The remaining prisoners, those who could walk, in their striped pajama-like uniforms and shaved heads, and there were maybe 100 of them. They were following an old wagon, like an old hay wagon, and they had about maybe 10 to 15 naked bodies lying across the wagon, and they had 2 old draft horses pulling this thing. And they were coming up, just up the hill there out of the camp to a huge open trench where they were going to dump the bodies. And they had somehow gotten a couple of little old instruments, and I could hear one of the prisoners, and they were all extremely frail, one of the prisoners trying to play what I recognize as just the familiar theme from Chopin's Funeral March. One reason I wrote this particular poem is I remember somebody, I don't know if that person even lived for 2, 3 more weeks beyond, but he just staggered up to the fence when I arrived, and he was eager to tell me about what had happened, and I could scarcely understand, but I knew what his huge effort was in trying to communicate something.
Frankly, it surprises me how anyone could respond to something like that with poetry.
You can't respond immediately at all. I wrote this poem years after the experience, like a quarter of a century later.
It nevertheless grapples with it, and it does so with rhyme. There's a reason for bringing rhyme to it, isn't there?
Oh, of course. You want some sense of bell-like, dirge-like reiteration of items, and the rhyme sort of strikes like that, or could be made to strike like that in a poem of this nature. War. When my young brother was killed, by mute and dusty shell in the thorny brush, crowning the boulders of the Villa Verda trail on the island of Luzon. I laid my whole dry body down, dropping my face like a stone in a green park on the east banks of the Rhine. On an airstrip skirting the Seine, his sergeant brother sat like a stick in his barracks, while cracks of fading sunlight caged the dusty air. And in the rocky, rolling hills west of the Mississippi, his father and mother sat in a simple Norwegian parlor, with a photograph smiling between them on the table, and their hands fallen into their laps like sticks and dust. And still other brothers and sisters, linking their arms together, walked down the dusty road where once he ran, and into that deep green valley, to sit on the stony banks of the stream he loved, and let those murmuring waters wash over their blood-hot feet with a springing crown of tears.
Does the poem make the loss bearable? Endurable?
In a sense, that's true. Part of the obligation of that poem, and of certain poems, is to take over that. It's almost as though the poem is some kind of a ritualistic exorcism of the feeling. It's not that you want to forget it at all, but that you want to recreate it.
To make it everybody's loss, not just your own.
Yes, I think that has happened in this particular poem. For instance, it was translated and published in Budapest, Hungary, after the Russians had crushed Hungary. It's been set to music by a former infantry officer in Hitler's army. It was translated into Japanese, and my brother was killed fighting the Japanese in the infantry. And the most moving letter I've ever received about it is from a Japanese mother who lost 3 sons in World War II fighting the Americans.
It could apply to any war, to any loss, to anybody.
Yes, but of course, art can only go so far. It's just one way of dealing with what we know. And not the way, just a way. Getting ready to really leave. Then, gathering in the dusk, comes the strange, long possibility of loneliness. Some simple rolling tune invades the dark, routing all that nostalgic poise of half-shadows. He stands, alone in an open room, listening. A moth beats at a rusted back-door screen. A stray car hums in another street. Old songs, old songs. Someone is going away. And then that tune, like a sentimental favorite, waltzing mindlessly around in years of young nights, and floating over the glamorous local stages of county fairs, trembles once more, follows an echo further down the street, falters, fades in again, and is gone. We swing for an utter moment upon that hinge. Hello, somebody. Hover ever so briefly upon that porch, impersonal as the summer air, and move on out into the perfect silence of the town.
What kind of moment is this?
This is the psychological moment when we are finally going away from our whole childhood home. I think almost everybody has such a moment in his life when you know that you're leaving home as your home, and you're coming back forever after as a visitor.
How do you mean the phrase, hello somebody?
To reach out to something unknown, some anonymous person out there who hopefully might be some kind of substitute for the home.
It's everyone.
It could be. Lost faces. Then, turning the corner of our little town in southeastern Minnesota, I came upon your face aloft in light, held to a shadowed angle in the sun. I had never met you before, never in all the world, but there you were, there in my little town, as though you had always been walking there up and down. Nothing seemed out of place. Your dress, your hair, the color of your eyes, the contours of your face. It was so natural, so absolute a grace, that there was no surprise. Only, by chance, some recognition in your glance that parted my lips to say hello to someone I had never known. You seemed at once a neighbor to my heart, and made a usual day of wind and sun with white clouds drifting in the sky, so strangely local that we seemed to step right from the sidewalk to each other's arms, although we only paused a second at that corner there, no more, and barely touched each other, passing through a door of shade and sunlight hinged upon our hands, took a few troubled steps, looked backwards, but at different times, and went on to our private lands. It was as though the quickened heart had sent a frontier expedition from its breast across the Mississippi going west, and rode the far Dakota's mound and plain, 2,000 miles of wilderness and rain, while all the sky, abstracted in its own renown to one blue eye, sent back into my life and to my town only its mute report. As though eternity had made a stop somewhere west of the mountains, where the mind, body, and heart might sit on a sunny headland gazing out past rock and wave and mist of what we are and seem upon that blue Pacific like a dream.
Did this actually happen?
I can think of maybe 100 different times, when I met people and I'd wanted to say hello or make myself known or introduce myself and didn't. And so I thought, well, I'll take one single memory of meeting someone in a small town going around the corner of a street, and I'll let that be the representative moment for all of these.
And it brings everything together. For one moment there is this face. It could be anybody's face.
Yes.
And it's a true meeting. Though no word is said, a hello, the beginnings of a hello.
There's like the old play, Every Man, let me go with you, or let me go with thee. I think it has some kind of sense like that. At least I felt that kind of thing. Once again, this is an emotion which I'm sure everybody knows and everybody has felt and experienced.
It's very ordinary.
It's extremely ordinary and common.
But it becomes quite extraordinary across the expanse of the poem.
Sometimes, I think a poem can work almost, say, as a geometric formula, where, if, for instance, you start at a specific point, a specific corner in a small town, and then you just throw the poem out from that corner, clear across the whole of Western America. And the experience then is supposedly expanding in the feeling of the listener. Song at Evening. Alone the evening falls on me along the cloud-swept day. I walk the dusty roadway with the soft feet of rain. If you, beside your lonely bed, say for me one prayer, I would not care if anyone knows all my tears. I stood beside the edge of town and tried a broken tune. If you should hear that wayward song, tell me you'll come. I saw a flower hanging low by a still blue pond, and as the rain and sun came down, it opened. That was all.
That was composed and performed.
Yes,
here.
it was composed by Patricia King, and it was sung by Sheila Bushman. It was performed both this past summer and then the summer before that. And before it was sung, I just simply read the poem, and then it was sung.
I remember it well.
Dusty roadway with a soft feet of rain. If you beside your lonely bed say for me one prayer, I would not care if anyone knows all my tears. I stood beside the edge of town and tried a broken tune. If you should hear that wayward song, tell me you'll come. I saw a flower hanging low by a still blue pond, and as the rain and sun came down, it opened. That was all.
It opened. Is that a kind of answer?
Yes.
And it's ordinary. It's very ordinary.
Oh, most ordinary. And sometimes you recognize this only by exploring it.
Well, here the poem itself explores like a song. It moves like a song, that wayward song that you try, that you put out there.
That's the intention of a lot of poems.
We've been visiting with poet Joseph Langland and listening to poems from The Wheel of Summer, The Green Town, and from Anybody's Song, published by Doubleday. The music was composed by Patricia King and performed by Sheila Gilson, with Patricia King accompanying on piano. I'm Henry Lyman. Thanks for being with us.
Poems to a Listener was produced by WFCR, Amherst, Massachusetts, with technical assistance by Sheldon Katzman. Financial assistance was provided by the Massachusetts Council on the Arts and Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Foundation for Humanities and Public Policy.